of 4 Holocaust survivors and the author of 5 books about the Holocaust. He spent 11 years as an elementary school teacher, and he now teaches at the college level and runs his own promotions company of businesses, along with writing a lot. His work is with the Holocaust Legacy books, and it focuses on retelling his grandparents' amazing stories, discussing the true meaning of Holocaust remembrance, and bringing to light the lesser-known issues and aspects of the Holocaust. Let's give David our OSHA welcome.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to talk about the microphone, and then I might move to it later, or we'll see if people have trouble hearing. First of all, I just want to see, can you raise your hand if you were here the last time I was here? A couple of people? Okay. Second question, is there anyone that doesn't have one of these? All right. Okay. I'm going to put these here. If you don't and you want to come up, you can grab one. Well, to start off with, I give you a little bit more of an introduction. That was a great introduction, and I'll expand on it a little bit. You know, when people ask you, it's almost like in the Breakfast Club when they said, "Who do you think you are? Who are you?" My first honest answer always is the grandson of 4 Holocaust survivors. It's relatively unique. Some people say, "Wow, are you the only one?" I said, "No, I think there are others, but it takes kind of a lot of circumstances, especially in the United States, for that to happen, to have 4 grandparents." I was also extremely lucky because all 4 lived in the Milwaukee area where I lived growing up. So I think, as you'll probably see during the presentation, it was very much a parent-child relationship in a lot of ways also. And they were so nice with sharing. Another thing I've learned, so many people have written to me about the books and about other Holocaust materials and said, you know, their parents were survivors, grandparents, but they didn't share with them. And you can certainly understand why. It's a very difficult topic. But my grandparents, if I asked them to, and I did these books from interviews that I did with them, when I asked them, they always answered. And they were always, and you can see in the books, really thoughtful about what they said. So it wasn't like they wanted to share all the time, but when I asked them or my sister asked them, they always did. And that couldn't have been easy, you know, especially a lot of times when they're thinking about the future and the present, to make that investment of emotion to go back. We're going to take a little walk through here just for an introduction, and then I'm going to split it a little bit into 2 with the 2 sides of my family. Up on top, that picture is all 4 of my grandparents together. So, thank you. Is this helpful?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Going from your left to right, the first are the Weisses. They were originally from Slovakia, and then the next 2 are the Grinbaums, who were in Poland. On the bottom, those are all, the first 2 are pictures of the Grinbaums. That's the first picture ever of either of them that we have. So you'll see in there, they ended the concentration camps with nothing. So they didn't have any pictures, any possessions. There's nothing that exists from before the Holocaust. My grandfather used to always say that his biggest desire, and he looked for a long time and we looked together, was to get one picture of his mother, but he was never able to find it. So that's the first picture. It's really the only picture I've ever seen of my grandfather where he looks kind of not healthy. You know, and these are in the books a little bit larger. And then them, you know, at the end of life, it's really survive and thrive, all of these. So a lot of this is about their survival, but also what they did afterwards and how they managed to cope with things. You know, we all have things in our life that are difficult, and we think about them a lot, and we think, how am I ever going to get over this? Well, I mean, they had such a dramatic event, and I know even as a child I wondered, how did they get through this, and how are they smiling and laughing now? So I always want to include some of that along with the pictures of them right before. The next 2 are my grandparents. On the other side, my paternal grandparents. Right after they got married, my grandma said that it was a holy wedding because she got married in holy shoes. And, you know, they survived by hiding. My grandma hid, and my grandpa was a slave laborer, and then he hid. They met in hiding, and they actually lived back in Czechoslovakia until 1949. And then when communism came, they were afraid of another Holocaust.
So they left for Israel before coming to the United States, and we'll get more into them. And then you can see them in that last picture, which I always kind of like because even though they're older, he's got his cane. It's more of a picture of kind of, I made it, and kind of a satisfied look to it. Try this out. Okay, on the next page, I had said that there were no pictures from before the Holocaust, but this small picture of Esther Zagrajew, that is my grandma from Poland, Grinbaum's mother. And my grandma took this picture before she was sent to concentration camps. She was in the camps for over 5 years. She was one of the first people.
Here's the mic, please.
Oh, okay. She was one of the first. She was in a town called Machki, one of the first towns to be invaded. And right after, in 1939, they started, first of all, scaring people. She had a tough time of it. Her parents were killed in front of her. And one of her sisters survived and ended up going to Belgium with her. But she took a picture of her mother, sewed it into her shirt, and whenever she needed to change through the Holocaust, she was able to get that picture out of her clothing. So this is the one thing from before the war that she has. And obviously over time we've made a point to copy it and keep it. The next two pictures are in Kielce, Poland. This was the site of a major killing of over 40 people. My grandparents, after the war, were in Kielce. My grandpa had healed for a while at a man's house in his hometown, and then they went to Kielce. My grandpa always had dreams, and we'll talk more about this, and he had a dream something bad was going to happen. The next day, they told the Jews that you had to give your weapons away. They had made up a story about Jews kidnapping a Polish boy, and they said, you can't have a militia anymore. My grandfather threw grenades, or was prepared to, for the militia, because the local population was very hostile towards these surviving Jews in Poland. They felt that the Jews were the cause of the war, World War II, and of the difficulty that Poland had. So they had to have a defense force. They told them, you can't have a defense force anymore. And my grandfather, who we'll talk more about, real alpha person, as well as my other grandmother, he said to my grandma, we're leaving. There's a train station 3 blocks away. They had been married, and their wedding pictures underneath, and they said, we're leaving, we're going to Germany. Don't know where, but we're getting on the train, we're going to Germany. They did, and then within 2 months, they had the mass killing in Kielce. But it was also a time, it was the first time where he experienced a little bit of joy after the Holocaust. People sang and danced. Most were still very religious. Sometimes that waned, as it did with him in the coming years. But at that point, they still were. And you can see their wedding picture. They were happy to be able to keep. After, we'll go into the details of it, but after the displaced persons camp, they were in Belgium. So from 1940, the end of 1946 to 1961, they spent those years in Belgium, and their daughter, my mother, was born. So you can see him dressed in his nice suit that he made. He was always wearing a suit he made. And then with my mother there, then those are a lot of the employees from the factory. He was in charge of everything that went on in the facility. It was Gabardine factory. And on the next page, you'll see my grandma and grandpa. I know some of these pictures are hard to see. You have some of the links, and then you can see them nice and large and in color. My grandma and grandpa with me and my sister. My grandma's holding me. Having grandchildren was like the prize of their life. For them, they were in their 20s, early 20s, when they had a daughter. So it was nice. They were very happy. They were able to have a family and get married. But they couldn't fully appreciate it. My grandma went through a lot. My grandpa was going through a lot. Grandchildren were the thing. And they were the perfect grandparents. I mean, the time that they spent with us and the love that they had, it knew no bounds. And as you can see, sometimes it's an academic pursuit, but also for me, it's, there's personal aspects to it. When I was 6 months old, my grandma and grandpa came over, and I we lived in a 4-family house that they owned, my mom and dad, my sister, and myself. And my grandpa walked in, and my crib was in the kitchen. And as soon as he walked in, he could hear the refrigerator running as I was sleeping in the crib. Everything was fine, I was sleeping there. My sister was in her room. And my grandpa told my parents right away, he said, "You're moving." He said, I'm giving you my house, and I'm moving back here. And he did. And he moved right back into the 4-family home, and he gave us the house in Wauwatosa, and then later to live in a more Jewish community in Mequon. But when he'd asked my grandma, he didn't even need to ask her. I mean, her answer was yes. Everything right away for the kids and for the grandkids. And then you can see in the next picture in the middle, I just want to make sure to mention this, there's so many different kinds of survivors. The young children in there, in addition to where my grandpa's arms are outstretched, in addition to my sister and myself, their grandfather was also a Holocaust survivor, and their grandmother was a pretend nun during the Holocaust. She was taken in a monastery, she spoke fluent Latin, and she hid there throughout the Holocaust. It was, I mean, the number of people that put their life on the line to save her was unbelievable. And he was also, the man was also the shamus, the main caretaker at Rabbi Torsky's temple on the west side. So they helped to get them sponsored to come here. And then just at the end, my grandpa owned a clothing store, and I'll have something I'll show you later from that. And then, you know, his pride and joy was getting people into nice clothing and everything that symbolized. He was also a big-time singer, so he loved singing. He sang in all of the Milwaukee and Florida commemoration events. The bottom, you see his great-grandchildren. So he lived, you know, kind of the power of will to 2012 to be able to see his 3 great-grandchildren. So it was a good life in a sense, in that afterward sense. We're going to look at this. So these grandparents, and then I'm going to stop there for the pictures, and then I'll pick up again with this when we get to the other side, because I don't want to confuse, you know, one side with the other. But my grandfather, the grandfather we were just talking about here, was born in Miechał, Poland, and it was right outside of Krakow. And he went to school, Polish school, and he went to Jewish school. So his reading of prayers and everything was unbelievably good. All of my grandparents were. And then he went to the regular Polish school, and he decided when he was old enough that he didn't want to go to Polish school anymore. He only had about a 3rd to 4th grade education in reading and writing and all of that. He decided he wanted to get an apprenticeship. And every day when he would walk past the tailor shop, he'd go on his way to a soccer game past the tailor shop, he heard singing. So he went in the tailor shop after a while, and he said, I would like to be an apprentice here at the tailor shop. And he said, you know, my grandma taught me a little bit of how to sew, and he knew very, very little. It was really because of the singing and the joy it brought. 2 brothers owned it. It's called Matusinski's, and they called his father in, because he was 12 years old, they had his permission, and they said that after just a couple days, they wanted to pay. Instead of my grandpa's family paying a little bit, they said, we'll have you for free, and he can keep tips that he gets for delivering. He just had that kind of a personality, and you could see it at every stop through his life. So he was doing that, and life was really pretty good. They heard words about Hitler and the Nazis, but really, with as anti-Semitic as things were in Poland, that wasn't that unusual. So it wasn't as though it sent up 1930, to his memory, 1937, 1938, it didn't really send up huge warning signs, almost until the time that they came in. And as soon as they came in, my grandpa's town up, so September of 1939, early, very early in the war, there was a ghetto that was formed in Miechał, and they were moved into a very small area in the city. He was still allowed to leave so that he could do the tailoring, but now he had to sew for the Wehrmacht, for the German military. His boss, you know, was killed early on just for not saluting, just as my grandma's parents were shot, sort of as a warning sign that Nazis were going to do whatever they wanted, they did that sort of thing in Miechał also. He had 2 younger brothers. Now my grandpa did not know his birthday. He changed his age a number of times. So he listed in the United States when he came here, he just took what he had for Belgium. And in Belgium, he just decided June 5th would be good. He knows wasn't at all. He listed 1924. You know, and I asked him in our final interview, and I have this in one of my books, do you know? Like, you know, because for a while, one of his uncles said, oh, you're trying to cheat the Social Security and all that kind of stuff. And I said, you know, do you have an idea? He said, he really thinks it's 1925. It could be 1926, he has no idea about the month or the day. But 1939, he was somewhere around 15 at the time. So they took his family, put them in the ghetto, and they offered an opportunity for somebody to go to Krakow to work. He knew that if they had them doing extra work, they would give some food to the people. So he volunteered because he wanted to bring some food home to his mother and his brothers and his father, who were all there. And on the way back, he had a little bit of extra food he was able to take. He was hit in the back of the head, and he was knocked out. The food dropped out, and by the time he got back, he never saw his mother or his 2 brothers again. His father was taken with him to Plaza, which was the concentration camp shown in Schindler's List. And his father also, my grandpa always said he had this keen sense, he had dreams about what would happen. When the tailor was shot and killed, he was supposed to go with the tailor to make the delivery, and he said, no, I'm going to stay here and finish. He just thought he knew, kind of knew. His father had asked him, he said, why don't you come with me? I'm going to this other section of the thing. And he just said, no, I don't think so. And his father was killed on the way there. So he saw his father a few days longer than he saw his mother and his brothers. His brothers, since he never saw them, he was haunted by that. You know, up until the time, 1961, he left Belgium, he thought he could find his brothers. You know, so he had even said here a couple times, my sister and I remember saying that, he's like, that's how my brothers looked. You know, a little bit of, any time there was a boy or a child with reddish hair, it was always like those, might be, you know. So he thought for a while, and by the time 1961 he came here, it was a real break. Everything kind of changed. He knew he wouldn't find people. When he was in Plaza, he was building tunnels. And he decided that he couldn't lift his arms anymore. He knew he was going to be close to the end. He went on a work walk with the people, and he snuck away, and he tried to escape. He went into a truck that held building materials for roofs. And he was in there, it was perfectly dark, and he was able to be on the truck. And by the way, this was not a Nazi truck. This was a truck from a company, like we hear about Bayer or Siemens or BMW or those. They had work going on in concentration camps. They were getting free labor for what they were doing. He snuck in there, and then he had a little bit of an opening. He didn't know how long he was in the truck for. He jumped out of the truck and was by a garbage bin. And he was hoping there'd be food there, but there wasn't. There was just materials. He had to hop back on a train to get back to the concentration camp. He just hopped on the first train that he saw. So he probably didn't make it very far out of the camp, was his thinking. When he arrived back at Plaza, they asked him his name, and he said, you know, his name really was Jack or Yakov Grinbaum. He thought that if they knew who he was and he escaped, they'd kill him right away. So he changed his name to Kalman Znilek. It was an old family name. His mom's side was Znilek, and he was Kalman Znilek all the way to the end of the war. So he always kept that, you know, he kept that name. And on Liberation, he always said he had 2 birthdays, his real birthday, and when he was freed, and then he also got his name back, and he wasn't Kalman Znilek anymore. And then he was transferred. He was in Buchenwald, and he was in Dora, and then the last camp he was in was called Harzungen, and physically he had been there so long. He had been in the camp so long. He was out of the ghetto by 1941 and sent to the camps. He always believed you had to keep moving. If you were in the same place, eventually your name your number was going to be called and that was going to be it. He also believed he always had to find somebody, one person, and make kind of a buddy system type thing. Not too many people, not in a group, but one person. And when he was at Harzungen, he could hear, and he spoke perfect German. A lot of Jews, all Jews spoke Yiddish, and he spoke perfect Yiddish too. But from his time in the store as an apprentice, his German was perfect. So he heard the guards talking, and he kind of knew, he said he kind of knew that things were coming to an end. Things were going bad for Germany, and the guards' morale was not as good. He would describe early on, they would take glee and joy in hitting Jewish people and even killing them. By this later time, I don't think it was all it was cracked up to be for the German soldiers. And he was listening, and he went up to a man one day, and this kind of sums up his experience and who he was, and he said, you look a little bit cold. And my grandpa always said the man looked back at him and said, why do you care, dirty Jew? Like, what's it to you? And he said, well, it's October, it's Poland, you just look kind of cold. If I could make you a liner for your jacket and for your boots, you'd be a lot warmer. And he'd talk to the guard every once in a while, didn't hear anything for a little while, and the guard came up to him one day and he said, can you really make lining for my coat, for my boots, and for everybody I work with? And my grandpa said, sure, yeah, I can. And he said, but I really need a hat. Can you make a hat? And my grandpa said, hats are my specialty. I can make hats for everybody. Well, of course, he never made a hat before. But, it was about, he was extremely clever. And he said, sure, he knew he'd figure it out. So instead of doing the regular work of the concentration camp, he was in a tailoring shop. And he was allowed to stay there. They kind of trusted him enough, like, you could be over at the tailor sewing. And he did. And he decided he was going to take his Russian friend, who was not Jewish, and he was going to try to escape. He felt liberation was going to come. There were bombs he heard every once in a while, and he said he just thought the Nazis were going to kill everybody in the camp. So he had to be somewhere else. He sewed 2 Nazi uniforms. So he made for himself a Nazi uniform. He made for his Russian friend a full Nazi uniform. He stole 2 guns, and he memorized the times that the guards were leaving, coming, and going. There was a forest area within the larger structure. And he picked the time, and he went out into the forest area with the Russian. Now, an interesting thing is he never told the Russian he was Jewish. He felt that the Russian would have killed him if he knew he was Jewish. That's how much anti-Semitism there was. That it was unbelievable. I mean, Mike, there's a lot of talk now with Poland and how Poland wants to say that there wasn't anti-Semitism in Poland. That kind of an issue, was Poland a victim or a perpetrator? According to my grandparents, definitely a perpetrator. As were many of Russian citizens in Ukraine. It was rough all through the war. My grandpa would always stop in the interview and he'd say, I don't think they were Nazis. They were Lithuanian guards, or they were Hungarian guards. So he was out in the forest, and he said that's when he felt the closest to dying, because his friend was with him, and they hadn't eaten much in a while, and he was kind of going mentally crazy, a little bit, his friend. And Nazi guard was within distance, and he thought he could shoot and kill him, his Russian friend. And my grandpa had to hit him over the head with his rifle in order to knock him out, so he wouldn't kill the guard, because that would be the end of them then. And he said that and one other time we'll get to in a little bit were the 2 scariest times that he had. He was out in the forest area, and he heard a couple of intense days of bombing. It was just unbelievable. And then he heard the Russians coming. They liberated the camp, and he took his Nazi uniform off, dropped the gun, and basically he had his undershirt, a pair of pants, or shorts on, or underpants. That was it. He had nothing else. He had no place else to return to, no birth certificate. He didn't have a possession in the world. He had no idea who was dead, who was alive. That was it. Well, they took everybody to a relocation center. They really wanted to get everybody back to their hometown, just because it would be cheaper than having displaced person camps. he was sent back to Miechał, and he wanted to go initially. He knew he didn't want to settle, but he figured he'd stop there and see if maybe somebody was alive. He went to one customer, a Christian man. He said he was the only one in town he trusted. And the guy told him, he said, I don't think any Jews survived. He said, I think you're one of the only ones that did. He said, here, there's one man named Lazorek, and I will walk you to his house. He was in his 50s. I'll walk you there. Because if my grandpa would have walked through the streets of Miechał, Poland, after the Holocaust, in April to May of 1945, he would have been killed. Somebody would have killed him. So he said, I'll walk with you, and then they'll leave you alone. So he did. This man, Lazorek, my grandpa always said, he looked at him and he said, I knew your family, and what I eat, you eat. He said, you're going to have everything that I have for as long as you would like to be here. And my grandpa was there for 4 months. And Lazorek told him, he said, there's a place, he called it kibbutz, and that was Kels. He said, a lot of young people are going there. Why don't you go there, and you'll find a wife, and you'll get married, and you'll see if you can leave Poland. You need to leave Poland. And this man, Lazorek, was a little older to leave, but he said, you need to leave. And that's how my grandfather ended up in Kels. And after Kels, he went to the relocation camp. They were at one in Stuttgart for a little bit, and then this is probably, or one of my most prized possessions. In Regensburg, they wanted to allow people, and I'll keep this up afterwards too, they wanted to give people some sort of recognition so that they could get a job, and they could go somewhere if they stayed in Germany or wherever they went. So they gave this to my grandfather, and it's just that he was a master tailor. It has his name on and everything in the displaced person camp. Well, they sent a copy of this to Belgium, and he was able to get an interview, or actually they just said, we'll send somebody to you in Belgium. But he didn't have any money. He didn't have any papers. He didn't have anything. So his brother-in-law, his wife, my grandma, had one surviving sister, and they met in Regensburg. There were a lot of lists listing who, you'd sign up places that you had survived. My grandma found that her one sister survived. Her sister got married to her sister's husband. So her sister was killed in the Holocaust. Her husband married another sister. And it kind of symbolizes the fact that you did what you needed to survive. A teen was better. They also went on to have one child and lived out their life in Belgium. You did what you had to. First, this man was going to go, and then he got kind of cold feet. And my grandfather never got cold feet. He just didn't, one thing I learned as a grandchild, and I think my parents as children of Holocaust survivors had a harder time than I did. I learned that nobody would ever, be the man that he was, He just didn't fear anything. So he got the fake papers, and also we have to keep in mind, this is 1946, so if he was born in 24, 25, he was 21, 22 years old maybe, very young. And he got on a train to go to Belgium. And he was hoping he could make money and then send it for his wife's sister, and his brother-in-law. And when he said this was as nervous as he had been during the war. This and the time in hiding. He noticed that they were checking papers at every stop. He met a woman, and this woman, he started talking to this woman, and he started getting a relationship with this woman. He was my grandpa, you can see in the picture, a very good-looking man. I mean, he was looking for women his whole life. I mean, he was a good-looking man. He, as we'll go through, he enjoyed life, and he had a charisma that people were so drawn to. And this lady and him started talking, and she said to him, hey, you know what? Even though he was married, he had gotten married already in Kels, why don't you come with me to Paris? He said, I know you have illegal papers. Why don't you come with me to Paris? Forget about Belgium. Belgium's not, Paris is where you want to be, and we'll get married and we'll be in Paris. And my grandpa said, okay. He said, but I would like to stop in Belgium first because this man promised me that I promised him and that I would meet him, and I'll stop in Belgium first. The lady said, okay. And she paid off the guards on the train to let him go through. Because she had figured out, he was a Holocaust survivor, he was illegal. They let him go all the way through to Belgium. He never went to Paris. He never had any other contact with her, but just one of the many things that he had to do. When he was in Belgium, he was an illegal person, or, as we hear now, falsely so often, illegal alien. And that makes a difference for me when I hear about that. Oh, they came here illegally, they broke the law. Well, so did all of my grandparents, many times. They did what they had to do. He met the man in the tailor shop, and the man said to him, no, you can go, I don't want you. He said, I thought they were sending me a master tailor, like it says on the certificate, a master tailor, not a boy. And he said, well, I can do this. I made this suit that I'm wearing. You made the suit. And he said, come on, you didn't make that. You're wasting my time. My grandpa said, if you give me the material, I will make a suit for you now. And in one sitting, he made a complete suit for the man. And the man said, okay, you're hired. But he couldn't leave the shop, ever. So he was illegal. If you would have been captured, just like on the train, if you were captured, you were in jail. Well, who was going to save my grandpa in a jail in Europe? Nobody. That would be his last spot. And eventually, the owner of the store liked him so much, he had an immigration agent come in and try to give him a green card. And it was the same kind of thing where my grandpa said to him, your coat is a little bit outdated. It's a little bit rough here. And that was gabardine too. That was a material design of it. And he said, let me make you a new one. That was always his thing. I'll just make you a new one. He made him a new one, and he got the green card. He was able to send for legal papers for my grandma, and that was where they lived until 1961. And my grandpa said Belgium was like a mother to us. So it was a really, it was a good time, but it was also very, very hard. They were too young to have children, my grandparents. They were dealing with tremendous emotional issues. Nothing more than you would think. But when you lose everything, when you lose everything, it's an awful lot. And in Belgium, my grandpa was dealing with these things, but he was also really looking forward very, very much. He started another tailor shop with his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law was a great guy. I met him once, but he wasn't a very good tailor. But my grandpa's thing was, wherever I go, you have to accept him too. That was why he left the one tailor shop. And then this man came to him. He had a reputation. People just knew. This man said, when my grandpa was working with his brother-in-law, why are you in this little place? Why don't you come and you'll be my partner? This man was a little older. He was a Belgian Jew who survived the war in hiding, just like a lot of Jews did in Belgium, because a lot of the citizens, Christian citizens, were willing to hide people in Belgium. So my grandpa managed all the people from the picture in there and ran the factory. He did very well. He was always an achiever, made a lot of money. And he was told by doctors, though, they would ask him, how many days a week and how many hours are you working? And he wouldn't reply, because he knew they'd be mad at him for how much he was working. But in his mind, he had to. He was a real visionary. He bought a 4-story building in Belgium. And people thought, you're going to go bankrupt. What are you doing? You rented the first floor to a handbag company. The next to the owners of the handbag company. My mom and them lived on the 3rd floor, and then they had a single tenant on the 4th floor. By the time they moved here in 1961, he owned the entire building without any loan, and was able to take all the money and start what he did in the United States. It was never just about surviving for him. It was always about looking forward. My grandma she survived all those years in one camp. Before the camp, she spent a while in slave labor, but then she was at a camp called Parshnitz, and she was an incredibly hard worker. One day you were sick, and that was the end for you. There was a lady in Florida she knew that was sick, and my grandma did her work. And years later, and I remember this was 1996, I remember hearing her say, they said, your grandma saved my life. Like I was sick and your grandma did the work for me, and I'd be dead if it wasn't for that. You know, and my grandma didn't even remember it. You know, I mean, toward later in life she did have memory issues, but that was just life. She just did those kind of things for people. You know, I'm sure that wasn't the only person she did it for. She was a larger, strong lady that just went through everything. But unfortunately, she had symptoms of bipolar, and then it was just too much. What she saw and what she lived through were just too much. And Belgium also, same thing, times of great joy for her, and times were tough. They came to the United States because they were fearing that Stalin was going to take over, or communism was going to take over. He was done by then, all of Europe. There were always reports of this, food shortages. Belgium lost the Congo, which they owned in Africa. Times were getting tough, and my grandpa said, and in my interview with him, he repeated the same line, "I'm done with Europe, I'm done with Europe." They were thankful for Belgium. He wanted to come here. And because of the diploma, he sent a copy of it. He was hired. They said that they needed him as an employee, which was the way to get into the United States, at Meyer Krum, just a good name, but Meyer Krum on the south side, tailor shop. And Torski's made the arrangements for them to come. So they lived on North Avenue, on Center Street, around where Torski's temple was. And they were brought over by the lady I mentioned before was in the convent. And once they were here, my grandfather worked for a couple other places, but he was always the kind of guy that was looking past. He wasn't going to work for anybody because he knew more than everybody about everything, you know. And he just knew, you know. He worked at Harley's for a little while, and the people were jealous of him because he was a master tailor. These guys knew how to sew certain things, but he could do everything. And so he decided he was going to start his own store. And he had a good friend, Walter Peltz, and this lady, Sonia Rich. And they said to him, if you have the ambition to start this, then you should start it. So he went to Whitefish Bay on Silver Spring, and he met a Jewish man, an American Jewish man, and he talked to him a little bit, and the man said to him, you can't rent this space. He said, you know, you should just work for somebody else. You went through a lot in your life. Don't start your own business. It's too hard. With the way you talk, because his English, even at his death in 2012, was very hard. My wife had a hard time understanding him. He said, just forget about it. You're not going to make it. And that was it. They left him. My grandpa ran into some of that with Jews, American Jews, where sometimes there wasn't the respect, but also there was kind of a feeling like you survived, be happy. And that wasn't what my grandfather was going to do. So he drove down, he loved the big North Avenue, how nice and huge it was. And he saw a couple of empty storefronts, 7221 North Avenue, so it's about between 72nd and 73rd Street. And he called the number, a man came, it was a young, non-Jewish man, kind of a portly guy, and my grandpa always said he had nothing in common with him in the world. You know, Grandpa would try even in his broken English to sweet talk people and stuff, but not with this guy. And my grandpa said told the man, he said, I feel sorry for you. It's kind of like the Nazi in the camp. I feel sorry for you. You own this building and with your family, and you've been vacant. I've seen this for a long time. And he said, how about this? I'll give you the lease and you have nothing to lose. And the guy said, no, then you're going to remodel and it's going to be hard for me. And he said, look, 6 months. Give me this for 6 months. I won't remodel anything. Just like you said, my English isn't good and it's very hard. I'm sure I'll go bankrupt in 6 months and then you'll just rent it to somebody else, okay? And this actually was late 1962. My grandpa told people it was 64 because he said nobody would believe it. Nobody would believe what I could do. And that was always what he would say. People couldn't believe what I could do. So he told the man, 6 months, he wrote a check, he had a check ready for 6 months rent and a cash bribe underneath. He gave it to the man, and he said, he always included a 50 underneath, or whatever it was in those times, and he got the rent. Well, he was there from that time all the way until he retired in 1992. And, you know, Milwaukee's really one of the most successful tailor shops, still in Wauwatosa today. When I started with the books, they were selling like an all from people from Wauwatosa. or people that said they had a connection to it. It was a German town, no Jewish people at all. And he didn't tell people he was Jewish. We still don't know to this day how many people knew and didn't know. Toward the end, once they knew him, he and my grandma would tell people a little bit, but he didn't say it. As a matter of fact, he hung this up in the store for the specific reason of people thinking he was German. He wanted people to think he was German. Because he could speak German, he could speak French and Flemish and Yiddish, which he didn't there, and Polish, but he held this up because he didn't want people to know he was Jewish. He didn't even mind it, I guess, if they thought he was German, or he had Nazi sympathies, but he didn't want them to know he was Jewish. But definitely by the end they did, and it was a great experience, and it was really nice because it was, a German area. And then I brought a couple things. This was a hat he always wore. It was like the last 5 years of his life, I always wore his hat. And my grandma died in 2009. Unfortunately, she was so tough, she lived longer than she really wanted to. She was just such a tough lady, and she was so sweet. We would see her as she was old, and she would tell the people that helped her, "I love you." And these are people that were like flipping her over as she was old, and it was probably painful, but she would still say to them, "I love you." When she'd see me, she'd always say, "I wish I could give you something." And even at that age, that was her instinct. And I'd say, "How are you doing?" And she'd say in Yiddish that she needs strength. And she prays to God. And my grandfather died quick. It was almost like he just suddenly decided, okay, I don't want to be into my 90s. I've done enough, this is it. But when I cleaned out his condo in Florida, he lived in Glendale at the end, in Florida. And when I cleaned out his condo, it was unbelievable. He had like 4 different hats like that, triptychs everywhere, carry-out menus. This was a guy that was gonna have a good time. Every New Year's Eve they'd go singing and dancing. He was going to have fun. And he was a different kind of guy. When my grandma passed away, it wasn't sad. Life for him was different. He felt bad. He said, well, she was sick for a long time, and maybe privately in his own thing he did, but he just went through so much. When other friends of his would die, he would always find something bad to say about them. I don't care, they're this or that. And it was just, he couldn't deal anymore with friends and family and all these people passing away. It was just, but it was always different. And for me, that was light, that was great. My daughter's 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, I had heard all of this before. That was just kind of how people were to me. I didn't realize, when friends would have grandparents who had college degrees or even high school degrees, it was so odd to me. To me, grandparents all had thick accents and had been through all of this. So, just unbelievable people and what they went through. And I think the key part of their marriage is probably the fact that nobody could believe what either of them suffered through. It was that mutual thing. It wasn't like most marriages. They didn't have a chance to meet and see what they had in common and things. It was a different time. Are there any questions? Yes?
Was there any idea of the woman who wanted them to go to Paris, where she got her money? What kind of, any background on her at all?
So she was a regular Christian lady, and she was just traveling.
She was just traveling from Germany to France. So for a lot of people in Europe, life was not all that much different. She wasn't Jewish. The war really hadn't taken that kind of an effect on her. Yeah, she was just... Okay. Is there anything else?
I think I'm surprised. I just didn't realize that they would be working for, like you said, they were actually working and helping manufacturing companies and everything like that. I just never even thought of that when I think of it.
Yeah, there's some things that you can find now that are really troubling about companies that are very wealthy, and they got their start or they made their huge profits at times when they were using slave labor from thing. And like on the front page when I have my website and blogs, I touch on some of that there with different topics that are sort of related, but most of the big German manufacturers haven't really even changed names. In Germany, they've tried to do the best they can in a lot of ways, but it still stands that there were a lot of companies that made a lot of money. Yeah, it was the free labor. They were actually making, in all of the underground bunkers and all that, they were making weapons. So they were making things to kill themselves, essentially. And my grandparents had there was a yellow powder, and they would make these plastics and also chemicals that were very dangerous. They said when Nazis would come in the room, they would wear protective gear. But the prisoners that were making these things would all handle them with their hands. That's unbelievable that they were able to survive all of that. If you take a look at the next, it's the start where it says, grandparents messing with sheet metal, and the landscapes children. And the other side of my family is from Slovakia. Now, at the time that they were born, my other grandparents were born 1922, 1924, 25. These grandparents, my grandma was born in 1906. My grandpa was born in 1915, so she was almost 10 years older than him. They were born in what was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And then, after the First World War, in 1918, it became Czechoslovakia. And the pictures on top, the first picture of 4, and that's many places on website and books, are my grandparents' grandparents. One from the sheet metal shop and one from was a barber. Messinger's sheet metal shop was in business until 1940. At that time, it was taken over by the Slovak government and just taken away, closed down, taken away, and that was it. The next picture are 3 children. My grandma had 6 sisters and 1 brother. 1 sister and 1 brother died before the Holocaust. 1 sister lived and made it here to Milwaukee. She left, she married an Austrian Jew, and they left in 1939. But one of her sisters lived in Vienna, and these were her 3 kids, Dagmar, Kurt, and Renee Landstein. When I would go to my grandma's house, I would ask her, can I see the picture of the children? And she always knew what I meant. It was always these 3 children. They were killed in the Holocaust, and their parents were killed in the Holocaust. And I have the family tree in Lay's book. It's just, if you count up the percentages and the numbers, only 17% of Slovak Jews survived. And that ends up being what it turned out about for their family. The next pictures are my grandparents and my grandma feeding the dog. The youngest child was expected to take care of the parents in their old age. Her father died in 1924, but her mother lived all the way till 1942. She died just before she would have been deported. And that's what my grandma did. From 1906 to 1942, she was with her mother. So by the time the Holocaust started, she was already quite a bit older. She was almost a different generation than my other grandparents. And by the way, with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and Czechoslovakia and Slovakia, my other grandpa, Grandpa Grimbaum, that I mentioned in the first part from Poland, used to always say, your other grandparents, they're not really from Czechoslovakia. They had this rivalry in part because they were in-laws. As one of our other relatives from England, another survivor, would say, it was the in-laws and the outlaws. But he used to say, they're not really from Czechoslovakia, they're Hungarians. And I said, well, why do you say that? They were from Trnava and Nitra, and that's nowadays in Czechoslovakia at that time. And he said, no, they're really from Hungary. People always say they're from Czechoslovakia when they're from Hungary, because nobody likes the Hungarians. And it was always those kind of competitive or little things. But in reality, they were a little bit Hungarian. Their main language was Hungarian. They lived close to the Hungarian border. And when they were born, it was Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Picture on the end is my grandpa in the Czechoslovak military. So from 1918 to 1935, they had a president, Thomas Masaryk, who was a real humanitarian. One of the greatest leaders, really, of all time. He took this country and said, we're basing this on human rights in Czechoslovakia. So the Jewish people especially were very, very happy to be in Czechoslovakia. He was glad to be in the military. And this picture of him, I always love this picture because he had no idea what was coming in his future. I mean, you look at this picture, he was a young man. He probably planned to get married, have children, stay living in Nitra, and he you couldn't see the sadness yet in his eyes. He was one that told me he could never really smile. We would get him to smile, but I think he was kind of humoring us. But he had a sadness about him. He would always say he didn't recover. But in this picture, that was what he was supposed to be. I mean, he still lived an amazing life and he had his good moments, but that was... On the bottom, that's my dad, the baby. And then that's in Czechoslovakia, so that's in 1947. The picture next to it is my grandma and a lady named Hermine Wilhelm. Hermine married a Catholic man. Their children were baptized and they converted to Catholicism. Hermine hid my grandma, and then Hermine made arrangements for all of the other hiding that my grandma did in the Holocaust. She also let my grandma dig up part of her garden where my grandma was able to keep some things. Everything that my grandparents have from before the Holocaust, this side, is from a friend of my grandpa's in the military, in the Czech military, and from inside the garden, dug underneath the garden. So, of these things, this prayer book at one point was in the garden. With other things, my sister has the candlesticks that were also there, that she uses every Friday night. Hermina was then sought after by the Hlinka Guard, because in Slovakia broke free as their own country in 1939. They made a deal as a protectorate of Nazi Germany. Father Joseph Tiso, so he was a Catholic leader, he agreed with Hitler that he had a lifelong hatred for Jews that went way before Hitler. And Hitler at one point was quoted as saying, I can't believe this little priest is sending me so many Jews. Slovakia actually paid Germany to take their Jews away in the beginning. And Hermina was sought for death, but she was not caught. But there was a guard that was sitting on the chest that she was laying inside of. She almost died trying to save my grandma and a number of Jews. She actually came to the United States in 1910 to live here, but she couldn't adjust well, so she moved back to Europe in 1910. She came to visit here in 1963, and then she passed away a few years later, but she was definitely one of the saints. As I mentioned before, they feared communism, they went to Israel, and my grandma hated it. It was, it sounds romantic, like it's a new country and all this kind of stuff, but it was dry. You could see in one of the pictures